PowerPoint, and then we're going to go straight into the demo. I'm not going to try presenting because it feels like every time I do that, it shares it on a different screen and causes issues. But I'm going to be talking about Azure Front Door. So the first kind of question is, what is Azure Front Door? And I've got a very, very short description here. If you Google Azure Front Door, Microsoft has tons of great documentation out there, way more than I could describe in this 15-minute presentation. But essentially, Front Door is a global load balancer for web applications. It's very specifically for web applications, layer 7, HTTP traffic, HTTPS traffic. And what I want to show in these 15 minutes is just kind of a quick configuration of how you can use Front Door inside of Azure. So this is the demo that I'm going to put together. I'd like to have a visual to kind of have something we can reference. But I'm going to have an app service deployed to, or two different app services, one deployed to the Central US region of Azure and one to the East US 2 region of Azure. And these are both running the same code base. They're both doing the exact same thing. And I'm going to put a Front Door load balancer in front of it, which is a global resource inside of Azure. And it's going to direct traffic to one of these app services. You can configure this to do it based off of geo proximity or shortest latency, or you can just say, I always want it to go to Central US, for example, unless Central US is down, and then I want it to go over here. You have lots of configuration options for this. So let me hop into Azure here. For the speed or sake of time, I already created those app services. So if you see here, I've got one that's in the Central US region. I got one in the East US 2 region. And I did not actually put any code base behind this. I just went into the Azure portal, created an app service. And the only thing I changed about it is, this is the default splash screen for an app service, is I went ahead and stuck some extra text in here just so we can see where we're at. So this is our Central US app service. And if I go back here inside of Azure and I go to my East US 2 one that I got labeled here, we should see, all right, so when I hit these app services directly, I've got one in Central US, I've got one in East US 2. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to put a Front Door in front of it. So we're going to go ahead, hit add, we're going to search for Front Door. Hey, there it goes. One of the things you'll notice when you're creating a Front Door is it thinks it's defaulting it to some location. You can't change it, you can't do anything with this. I don't understand why this is on this screen. It actually creates it as a global resource. So just a little oddity, quirk to be aware of. And then we go straight into the designer for Front Door. So first of all, since we're going to have this front door to our application, we need to provide a URL for it. They're all going to end in this .azurefd.net. You can also apply custom domains on top of this, but it needs to have at least this base domain to start with. So I'm going to call this Front Door Azure User Group Demo, and I'll put global in the name just for fun. Not going to dive into these in this 15 minutes, but Web Application Firewall is a pretty cool feature you can do as well to protect your website from those common vulnerabilities that they always talk about: SQL injection, cross-site scripting, that whole list of OWASP top 10. So now we've got our front URL. This is the entry point to this Front Door. And now we get to specify a list of different backend pools that we want traffic to go to. So this does not need to be a globally unique name or anything special. Because I'm not very clever, I'm just going to call it a backend pool. And I'm going to go ahead and add a backend to it. Now, if you're using Azure, you have lots of Azure resources that you can just defaultly put in here, such as App Service. But you don't have to use this strictly for Azure-based applications. You can put any custom URL you want in here. You could put, this could be running in AWS, this could be running on-prem, but exposed externally, and any of these Azure services. But yeah, I'll stick with the app service. We can see it found my subscription, and it's given me a drop-down list of all the app services I have in my subscription. In this case, I just have these two. So I'm going to say, yep, I want my Central US backend. If you have something crazy where you've configured different ports, you can go ahead and specify this here, but these defaults look good. And you can specify priority. And this is where you can say, I want my Central US app service to have priority number 1, and then maybe my East US2 app service to be priority 2. Or you can distribute it based on weight. You could say, I want 99% of my traffic to go to this one location, but 1% to this other one. You can set those to whatever you want. Again, I'm just going to leave those alone. So I've added my backend to this backend pool. Now I need to add the other one for East US2. All right, so I've got 2 backends inside this backend pool. We could add more, but I don't have any. And then we're going to specify how we choose when traffic goes to which one. So for example, we have a health probe. We need to check to see if one of those backends is up. So every 30 seconds, it's going to ping this just /path to see if it's getting a healthy response, like a 200 response from the app service. If it gets a 200, that's okay, that's great. If it gets something like a 401 unauthorized or a 404 does not exist or something like that, it's going to consider it an unhealthy backend. And what it does based off of that is based on these load balancing configurations. So for the previous 4 pings of those backends, did we get 2 successful 200 responses? If we did, that backend is up and it's healthy. But if we did not get 2, then it's considered unhealthy. And we're going to try going to a different backend instead. So I'm just going to leave those alone. And now I have to tie these 2 things together. Because I could create additional backend pools and I could have additional custom front-end domains here, I could potentially have a lot of different configurations or a lot of different routes in here. In this case, because I have 1 front end and 1 back end, it's pretty trivial, but we still need to create that routing rule to tie those 2 things together. So again, I'm not clever, so I'm just going to call it routing rule. And now I'm going to say on the front end, what traffic is coming into my front door, what traffic is it going to accept? Is it HTTP only? Is it both? HTTPS? I'm going to say both. Again, I could have more front ends in this dropdown, but I just got the 1. And then what traffic I want this routing rule to apply to. If I want it to only apply to specific subsections or specific paths inside of my URL, I can configure that. In this case, I want it to do all of them, so I'll leave it as /star. And then what I want it to do. I could have it redirect to a different site. I could do some clever rules with that. Oh, that doesn't look very good. We'll ignore that. But what I just wanted to do is I want to route traffic. I just want to forward it from my front end to my back end. So I'll leave it at the front end. I'll have my back end pool. It's auto-selected. And here I get to decide how I want traffic to go between these 2. So up here, I've specified going into my front door, it accepts both HTTP unencrypted and HTTPS traffic. Down here, I'm specifying between these 2, I just want it to forward HTTPS traffic. So this is all going to be encrypted here. So let's go ahead and add that routing rule. And really from there, we're ready to go. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to create this. It's not living in that East US2 region like it just showed. And we'll sit here and wait for it for a moment. Let me also go back to my resource groups here. So I was hiding a few things earlier. I already have a front door created. Okay, here we are. It's already done. I already have one created because we're going to do kind of a little baking show sort of thing here. Notice if you go to it, it says invalid URI. What gives? I just configured this. It all looked good. This is probably the #1 thing I want to share from here is front door takes a while for changes to get applied. It's moving out to a lot of different point of presence locations, and changes do not happen instantaneously. So when you create it, you're going to get this at first. It takes roughly 10 to 15 minutes for changes to get pushed out everywhere. So we don't have an extra 15 minutes in this presentation. So let's go back to our resource group. So I already created a front door to use for this demonstration. I've configured it the same way as we just walked through, and I have this front door URL. And so if I go here, Notice I'm not going to the website's URL, I'm going to front doors, and it routed me to the Central US app service. That probably makes sense because Central US data center is closer to us than that East US 2.1. So if we compare this, we're at the same site, just different URL. But now if I go into Azure and I go to my website and I turn it off, let's see what happens. What I am expecting is it should route me to the other location. But notice it doesn't do it at first. That's based on that load balancing rule that we had. Because I have to have multiple unsuccessful pings of that backend, I'm not getting anywhere. It's still trying to route me to Central US, and it's not quite working. So if we give this, let's give it like 20-ish seconds. Hopefully it'll bounce back up. While we're waiting those 20 seconds, I want to show that in that designer again. This is the other one that I created. One thing it'll show you about these health probes is because there's multiple locations of this front door, because it's a global service, it gives us this warning. You can decrease your frequency from 30 seconds. You could do this every 5 seconds, pinging your site to see if it's up or down. That would reduce your downtime. But there's a lot of health probes that are getting called here. So every 30 seconds will result in about 200 requests a minute hitting your site just to see if it's up or down. So if you change this down to 5 seconds, this is going to go to 1,000 plus requests. That can be a lot of noise. So you have to balance how often you want your website to get hit versus how long you want it to be down. So if we go back over here, hey, our site's back up again. We're still at our front door URL, and we are now hitting our East US 2 version of our app service. So there's a whole lot of other things inside of here that we could discuss. The web application firewall, they've recently added this rules configuration. Each of these topics could easily be a half hour plus on their own. But this is what I wanted to show, was a front door configuration going to 2 different app services and routing traffic based on whether they're up or down. So I didn't check what time I started. I hope I didn't go over. I hope I didn't go too short, but that's what I have for this presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. John, we'll go to you next. Are you all ready?
I am ready. Sorry, I was responding to the chat there, and then Scott finished up really quickly. So let me get into my presentation here. Okay. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, so this I'm going to go over a really quick overview of Azure app configuration, and then do a demo, and I believe the demo will take more than going through these very simple slides as well. So 15 minutes will go quick. So I do tend to talk fast. So again, if you have some questions, like Vaibhav was saying, stick them in the chat, and I'll try to respond to those during the rest of the meeting tonight. So, by the way, I'm John Brewer, Cloudable LLC, and I'm actually a consultant at Medical Solutions right now. I've been there for almost a year. So when Caitlin was introducing Medical Solutions earlier, I've been there. Good place, good people. So check it out if you want. All right, so let's dig in. All right, so very simple demo, very simple agenda. What is app configuration? Why should we use it? And go over a little bit of pricing information, and then finish up with the demo. So very simply, struggle to find some bullet points to put on here because it really is a simple overview of what this is. It's a fully managed, one location, centralized location of a place to host your configuration settings and feature management settings for your applications. So it'll replace things that you might traditionally have in your web config or your app config or in your app settings files within your code, in all of your types of applications, from like your web apps to your Azure functions, to things you might have hosted out in Service Fabric, for example, can all take advantage of the centralized location store of your settings. So there's a little bit more information in there. I've tried to put something else on this slide. So again, it's fully managed. So You don't have to worry about scaling it out and things of that nature. The data that you are putting into it for your settings and whatnot are encrypted at rest and in transit. They're stored in the primary region where you create your app configuration resource. And then as needed, it'll replicate to paired regions. And most importantly, it'll stay within your geography, like USA, government, Europe, for example. All right, so why use Azure App Configuration? I mean, something you'll hear all the time from developers and even architects is that, what I have is good enough. I get settings, I put them in my web config, I put them in my app settings. I might use them in my DevOps pipelines, so they're not in my code base, those kinds of things. But what the major reasons why you'd want to use app configuration, again, is a centralized configuration. Better protection of your sensitive settings. So this does have direct Key Vault integration, and also can use Azure Managed Identity, so you don't have to pass configuration strings around at all within your initial config either. Removal of your settings and feature management from your source code, your deployment pipelines, like I was talking about earlier, and actually even from the environment where your code runs. For example, if you're deploying to a Docker container to Kubernetes, where it typically get all of its settings from the environment, or you could use this instead. One of the most important things is real-time updates of your settings and features without restarting your application code or redeploying code. So I'll show you that in the demo, but basically you can establish a cache time of how long you want the settings that you have to be cached, and then after that it'll check a Sentinel value to see if anything should be changed, and then go grab new settings. I'll show you that Sentinel value as well. There's a nice UI for managing your settings and features. Somebody in your organization can manage those settings and features outside of development. Might be for your enterprise architecture team or your DevOps team, for example. Tagging and labeling of settings. So by tagging or labeling settings, you basically can separate your settings by environment or by site. A good use of labels, which I'll show you later, is a dev, test, staging, production. So you can manage the same exact setting across all those environments in the same UI in the same app config resource. And then also important, revision history of your settings. So if a setting were to change, or you need to go see what it was before, or just see if anybody has changed something, there's a revision history of your settings. All right. Pricing. There's a free tier. No SLA for that, 10 megabytes of storage. One important thing is you can only have one free tier app configuration per subscription. So if you have a non-production subscription and a production subscription in your environment, you're only going to be able to have one free in each for your entire subscriptions. Big difference between the standard tier and free tier is unlimited resources. You can have as many app config resources as you want when you're paying for them. Again, you get an SLA with paid, where you don't with free, which is typical. 20,000 per hour and $1.20 per day, about $36 a month. Very cost effective. You get this is important too. I'm not going to be able to show this, but you can actually use customer managed keys to encrypt the data and use private link to privately secure your resource on your private network when you're paying for standard tier. You can upgrade from free to standard tier, but you can't go the other direction. So once you decide to take your resource and upgrade to standard, you will be on standard from that point on. All right. So some things I want to show in the demo. I'm going to show how the connection can work in our setup. I'm going to use a .NET Core 3.1 web app to present this, and hopefully that will cover a lot of what you guys in this meeting are using, so it'll seem familiar to you. I'll show you the filters and the labels and how the auto-fresh settings work, so you don't have to restart your application or redeploy code. And then I'll show you real simple a feature flag capability that also is part of app configuration. All right, so off to the demo. And I must have. So, can you guys see this okay? Maybe I'll make it a little bit bigger. All right, so this is the app config resource, and I went ahead and set up some keys in here. Best practice from Microsoft is to kind of give it an app name. So I called mine app config demo, and this is my key value, which is test value 1. And by labels, I've set up a label of development, production, and test within this app configuration. So I'll show you how we can get those settings based on our environment or based on the label. All right, so here I have the application. Within our program CS, in our host builder, we basically add Azure App Configuration. We set a connection up. In this particular case, I am using Managed Identity. And for Managed Identity, the only thing I need to tell it is what service endpoint I'm using. I'm not going to show connection string because I need to have Managed Identity to work with Key Vault, because that Managed Identity flows through to Key Vault as well. And I've set up the necessary permissions in app config so that this app, either me locally or in Azure, if we have time, I'll show you deployed to Azure, we'll use the identity to get at app config. But if you don't want to use Managed Identity, you can definitely use it with a connection string. Here's an example of a connection string that you can get out of the resource. The next step is the select here. So we can have tons of keys in this environment across all apps across our entire organization. So I'm basically telling my app config for this app that I want you to select only the keys that start with app config demo. And then I'm going to actually also want that app config demo pulled off of that. So when I reference my keys within my application, I don't have to include that app name in front of it. So if I'm just looking at a connection string or I'm looking at a value like this test value 1, I don't have to include the app config demo in front of that. So that's what that trim key is for. All right, so then this next one is actually, so you can select multiple keys. So I'm selecting these. It doesn't have to have a label name. So this is actually going to be an empty set for us because I have actually a label on every single one right now. So the next select is saying, okay, anything that starts with app config demo for my environment, in this case, which will be development, and then I go ahead and trim the key prefix off of there. So when I run this, I'll only get, if I do test value 1, I'll get this one right here, which is test value 1 with the development label. Refresh, basically you tell it what key value in app config to watch. And whenever this changes, again with the label of development, it will refresh all the settings within my application space for that configuration. And I got a really short time span of 5 seconds. Default is 30. And if you're paying for this, this is some value you want to make sure you keep me a little bit higher if you don't need to have it. Maybe check it every 5 or 10 minutes because you will. It's pay per request after you get over 20,000. So it's something you want to keep in mind. Again, you can get Key Vault values. So I also have a value set up in here for Key Vault. So there's one value in here. This is actually the Key Vault here that is set up, and I have this one secret in here. And you can see here it stores a little bit of JSON about that configuration and for that Key Vault. So when I run this, we'll be able to see this Key Vault secret pulled out of Key Vault, and we expect it to have the value of secret value. I know, creative, right? So that's Key Vault, and then I'll come back to using feature flags as a little bit separate. So we'll go ahead and run this. It's just a simple web API. It's going to return the test value 1, test value 2, and the Key Vault secret 1 based on my environment that I'm running in. And quick for those that might not be familiar with how that is set up, that's just going to be an environment variable in your environment, and I've got it set up here in my debug settings. So we'll go ahead and run this. And it better work. So there we go. So I'm seeing development. I'm seeing the values that we could actually see within Key Vault, within app config out here. Sorry. What I'm going to do is change this value in real time. So without redeploying, well, I can show you that later, but without rerunning my code or restarting my code, I'm going to change the value of that key. So I've changed it. I took the word changed off of there. If I refresh this, even after 5 seconds, I still got my own cache because I haven't changed the Sentinel value yet. So if I go out to app config and I change this Sentinel value from development, I can change it to anything I want. It just has to be changed. So now I've changed that value. So now my configure refresh that's been set up is for 5 seconds. So after about 5 seconds, we should get the new value within our configuration. So nothing I want to call out real quick. Sorry, I jumped around a little bit on this one. Once we've set up the configuration here, it's as simple as injecting that into our classes as iConfiguration. So once I've injected it, then I have access to all those settings. All right, let's see. Feature flag. So we've set up one feature flag in there. I've called it feature A. If you check documentation, that's kind of a common name you'll see out there. But feature A for each one of these environments, so development, production, and test. To manage those features, there's a feature manager as well for a UI for it. So I've got it enabled this feature enabled in development right now. So if I run this, we should see it's going to check for this feature, which is feature A. If it's enabled, it's going to return this feature is enabled. If it's disabled, it's going to return disabled. So I'll run that real quick. So feature A is enabled. If we go back to our configuration of this, which I stepped over, again, I've got a cache expiration interval of 5 seconds. So after 5 seconds, in this case, there's no Sentinel to change. I just have to go change that feature to be disabled. And within 5 seconds, this will go and see that feature has been changed. So we'll do that real quick. So feature A in development, turn it off. Refresh this. Should give us about 5 seconds, but there we go. It's disabled. Another thing I could do real quick here is I could publish this code out to Azure, where I've set up the managed identity, and it'll run the exact same way. How am I doing on time, Vaibhav?
You can take 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes. Okay, I really talked fast. I don't know if I have 5 more minutes, but we will. So I've got a web app set up out here, app config demo. I went ahead and set up the identity, and I did system assigned identity, so I let Azure assign this identity for me. So over in app config, in access control, you can see here that I've added my config app service to be an Azure configuration data reader. So now when we run this in Azure, it's going to run as that identity, and it will have access to those keys. And we're running in production this time, so you can see that it picked up the production values. And that's basically all I had. So any quick questions, or do you want to move on to the next presentation?
I think we'll move on to the next one.
Okay, great.
Thanks,
Thank you,
John.
Yep.
Karthik, you are next.
Sure, I will share my screen right now. Let me know if you see my screen.
Yes, we can.
So my topic is on log analytics. So before going into log analytics, just want to give you a high-level overview of what is Azure Monitor. Azure Monitor collects and analyzes telemetric data for cloud and on-prem, and it's helpful for us to understand the app performance, and it also helps us to identify issues proactively. Azure Monitor is divided into many components. It provides insights, visualization, analyze, and to respond and integrate with other APIs of all the data it accumulates. So to help understand this better, I really like this diagram. If you see on the left-hand side are different source systems or resources which send data to Azure Monitor. Azure Monitor has two fundamental data stores. One is metrics, and the other one is logs. And these data again will be transformed into insights, visualize and analyze to respond and integrate. In today's presentation, my main focus will be on the log analytics and the alerts. And log analytics is nothing but a tool in every Azure resource to help us write queries and to analyze the results. Log analytics use Kusto query language to interact with the logs. And Kusto queries we can use a regular SQL language or a Kusto language too for querying. So I will directly go into seeing the demo to go over it. So I guess you guys are seeing my screen, just making sure. So
Yes, Karthik.
for log analytics, first we need. Sure, thanks. For log analytics, first we need to create a log analytics workspace. So the workspace defines. So I want to create a new workspace. If it takes more time, I already created one. I can show it up. I don't know why. So for the workspace, we need to select our resource group and name it LA. And I'll just create it. After creating the workspace, we need to associate our Azure resources with this log analytics workspace, so that Azure resources will pass on the log data to this log analytics. It might take a second. Deployment is succeeded. I will go back to one of the Azure resource and try to use this, the newly created log analytics workspace. So I'll go to one of the existing logic app. For for our Azure resource to pass on the logs, we need to configure diagnostic settings. Diagnostic settings, I already have one, but I can create one more in order to send logs to different places. So first I want to name it DS Azure Group. So based on the resource, we do have different kinds of logs. For Logic App has only workflow runtime. App Service have different other log types. And we have an option to select different types of destination where the logs need to be sent. So I will select log analytics. We have asked which workspace we want to associate these logs. I will associate with the one which I just created. We can also archive these logs in a storage account, and also we can send it to Event Hub. For this demo, I will only store it in log analytics. So I will save it. So going back to the resource. So after diagnostic settings is configured, we have to go back to the logs. I want to quickly run the Logic app a couple of times so that logs will go into the log analytics. I'm going back to the logs, which means so by default we get a screen with built-in queries. So it's total billable executions, logic app execution distribution by now. So if any of these built-in queries you like, you can just run it. So this is how the Kusta query language is. It will execute. So on the left-hand side, we have tables. For logic app, we do have 3 tables: Azure Metrics, Azure Diagnostics, and Activities. All these tables have columns, data elements, and it also gives the type of the data element for us to build queries. And also we can go to the queries, the same built-in queries we saw. So this is how we can query our data for the logs. For example, we cannot manually go on log queries all the time. In production environment, if, for example, I want to know when this logic app get failed, I want to proactively know that so that we can take actions. So I want to set up some alerts along associated with this logs. So in order for that, go to the alerts, create a new alert rule. Since I open the alert directly from the resource, it already selected my resource here. We can also create alerts from the log analytics. So for this resource, I want to set a condition. Based on the resource selection, Azure automatically gives some of the built-in queries. So I want to run failed run query. So any failed run, I would like to know, or else our team might like to know. So if any failed runs greater than 1 of total, greater than 0, we would like to know. And it asks what's the time period it needs to collect the data for this. So I want to collect this data for every hour. And the frequency of evaluation, I want it every hour. These are my conditions for the alert. So then we need to select the action group. So we need this notification to be sent. So I can select one of the existing action group, or else I can create a new action group right from here. In the action group, I'm giving the name for the action group. So I'm going next to the notifications. So in notifications, we do have 2 types. Azure Resource Manager role. Whoever the Azure Resource Manager, they will get the email. And I can say manager email. So it's a built-in. Along with that, I also want additional notifications. If you go to the next option say email, SMS message, push and voice. So what this means is I can configure an email. To get the alerts, I can also configure my team phone number. If my team have a production phone number, I can use it. Also Azure push notifications. So we can push notifications to Azure accounts. Also voicemail. It can also send voicemails. So for now, I am only selecting the email, clicking OK. So the name for this is Azure. I'm removing this resource manager role for now. Next, actions. So along with this notifying someone, we also have other action types. We can automate a runbook. We can run something. We can invoke a Azure function. We can invoke a logic app. I will show you a logic app example. So when I selected logic app, it gives you a list of logic apps. Since I have only one logic app, it only pulled it. If I select this, What it means is it will also trigger this logic app when that alert happens. And also we do have webhook. We can hook it with webhook, and we can tag it and following sections. I forgot to name the logic app. So I'm creating this. So this is the action group, alert rule created. So whenever that logic app get failed, I get an email notification. I get an email notification, and also a logic app will be triggered. Cool. So suppose if this logic app is not very critical, it's only business critical application. We don't have to. It's not. We don't have to fix the issues if it happens in the night. So we do have like a SLA of 1 or 2 hours in only during business hours. So we don't want any alerts in the night. So for that, we have to suppress these alerts. In order to suppress these alerts, there is something called action rules. So in order to go back to the action rules, so go to in the alerts, go to the manage actions. In the manage actions, we do have two things. One is action group. We just created the action group for an email and a logic app. Next to it, we do have something called action rules. In action rules, we can configure suppressing alert. So I want to configure that. Here, the scope will be it's taking time. 1 second. So the scope will be my logic app filtered by resource. I'll just select the whole resource. And I want to filter because it needs to know what needs to be. So for now, so we can give the severity. What it means is any action rule with severity 3, if we configure the severity, we can give the severity number, whatever it is. All the severity number 3s can will come under this condition, or else along with that, if I have a description equals to failed logic app. This is also one other condition I can give. So define the scope. So the scope here is suppression. I want to suppress. And suppression configuration. We can suppress from now on. We don't want these alert for certain period. We can suppress it here, or else at a scheduled time, from specific time to this time, or with a recurrence. In my, for example, as I said, in my case, it's a recurrent. I want daily start date to, I'll change it for next 10 years. I don't want this. I want this suppression logic to not run in the night. So I will select 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. We don't want these alerts to, this suppression logic should invoke. And the room name, suppress logic app alerts. And my resource group is this, enable upon creation. So these are a couple of things we can do with log analytics based on the queries we generate from the logs and the alerts and how to suppress it. Any questions?
There is a question, Karthik. How can Azure, Sunil is asking, how can Azure Event Grid listen to log analytic workspace, about log analytic alerts?
I think it's just an open question.
Abhinav, I missed the first part of the question.
Sunil, you're gonna ask a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, if there would be ever a scenario you want to do this, wherein you can subscribe to these log analytics alerts from the Azure Event Grid, and would there be a use case like that ever? Like, has anyone seen such kind of use case or think of it?
Well, I've seen use case where we have exported our Azure resource logs through an event hub outside of our Azure environment so that we can then analyze those.
Yeah, I had Vaibhav, I had one use case where I used Event Hub to create automation based on activity logs, right? So when we have a certain resource provision, we wanted to check it against our naming standards and stuff like that. So we had an Event Hub driven pipeline. There are various use cases in which you can use the multiple services like this to create your automation. Right?
I was talking about Event Grid.
Okay.
Actually, I did not experience with Event Grid yet, so.
And I have never played with Event Grids and log analytics, so I'm not sure if there is.
Okay. Yeah, this is just coming out of imagination. Like I was just wondering how, if somebody wants to use it. I'm not sure even if this use case is valid. Yeah, but anyways, thank you.
Any other question, guys?
All right, thanks, Karthik. Over to you, Ashish.
All right, sure. Thank you so much, Vaibhav. So I'm going to talk about Azure Data Factory. I know when Vaibhav and I was talking, we know it's a very vast topic. So I'm going to just scratch on the surface and start with what is Azure Data Factory, and I can show you guys. We have used Azure Data Factory at scale. We are doing a lot of data integrations. In our data hub projects and all of that. So happy to show you guys what we have done, but I don't think 15 minutes we can do a lot, but let me try, to at least scratch the surface, as I said, right? So I'm sure a lot of you guys already know what is Azure Data Factory. It's a fully managed data integration service in cloud, very flexible. Got a lot of adapters, more than 90 plus native adapters. Supports hybrid orchestration, on-prem, cloud, multiple use cases there. So with Azure Data Factory, we were literally able to, use it as a data movement as a service, and it's all a lot of our use cases are serverless, and a lot of use cases are on integration runtime, which is on-prem. But essentially, a lot of big data use cases today requires us to orchestrate and process an enormous amount of data. And Azure Data Factory, is actually built in for those. We have moved from traditional ETL to the ELT approaches with Data Factory, and there are various data integration projects that we're using Data Factory for. So,
my apologies, I couldn't hear what you said.
Sorry about that. So as I said, it's very flexible. You can, there are various use cases that you can use it for, for your SaaS applications, for your heterogeneous sources. You can just, a lot of the times we have a lot of data silos that we create in enterprise scenarios. Comes very handy in integrating all of that, right, with the multitude of adapters that you get. Various pipelines, you can create pipelines in such a way that if you have data sources in on-prem versus on cloud, you can leverage the hybrid data orchestration platform with integration runtimes. I'm going to talk about in a little more detail on integration runtimes and copy activities specifically, that how it scales and how you can use it for all your use cases. We have huge data load from SAP HANA, on-prem SAP HANA to Azure Data Lake storage, and then from there to Snowflake. Various use cases. We have at least 100 plus use cases that we have already, implemented on ADLS so far, on ADF so far. So yeah, it's very, very, powerful. SQL Server integration services. If you have legacy SSIS packages, and you can pretty much do a lift and shift with ADLS, ADF now. So very, very powerful. As we talked about natively, it has got 90 plus various native adapters and connectors that you can use pretty much at no cost. You definitely pay for your pipeline runs and all of that, but the adapters itself, if you go to any other product like Dell Boomi or any third-party product, you pay per connector. So that's not the case with this particular product. Scale, it has got enormous scale. I'm going to talk a little bit around performance. What we could do with the copy. How can we scale copy activity and stuff like that. So we'll go into more details. I'll not spend too much time here. At a high level, what are the key components, right? So you'll whenever you're working with ADF, you'll deal with all of these, every day, right? So pipelines, activities, data sets, link services, data flows, and integration runtime. These are the key components. If you already worked with ADF, you probably know about these already. But I just thought I'll just quickly talk about the basics, before we get into scenarios and copy activity and stuff like that, right? So each data factory will have one or more pipelines. Pipeline is more of a logical grouping of your activities that you perform. Each activity can perform a unit of work, right? So activities like a stored procedure or copy activity and stuff like that, right? So you can have pipeline, is more of a logical grouping of those activities, right? So you have a pipeline with a bunch of activities in it, and then each activity represents your step in the pipeline. And your data sets represent your data structures like tables, files, and stuff like that. Link services are pretty much like connection strings, and it kind of defines your connection into your data sources and sinks. There's a terminology that you would hear with copy activity is sink and source. So sink stands for where you want to keep your target and the destination, and the source is your source, as the name says. So you will always have, like for example, till last year, Microsoft did not support SFTP as sink. You could use SFTP as source, but you could not use SFTP as sink. So you cannot, actually copy data to SFTP using ADF. Now that is available. So things like that, right? So these are important terminologies that you should know. Besides that, data flows is a new thing you might have heard in Ignite. Microsoft announced the GA of graphical data flows, and then integration runtimes. This is the compute infrastructure that you can use. The ADF will use behind the scene. You have two types, and we'll go into detail. There's Azure, integration runtime, and then self-hosted. There are various reasons why you should use them. You probably would end up using both of them, but depending on your use cases, you will have to go with one versus another. High level, again, this is just scratching on the surface. There are so many use cases where you would use ADF. I've just listed down top few. There could be thousands of other. You're transforming, you're doing cloud transformation. You want to migrate your on-prem data warehouse to Azure. You want to lift and shift your SSIS infrastructure. You're doing data warehouse modernization. Could be your data-driven applications. It could be your data analytics use cases, and or you have a data lake somewhere. It could be AWS. It could be Azure. You want to load data into your data lake. You can have the ELT. Based data loads using ADF. So it's in a nutshell, it's a cloud-based integration service that allows you to create data-driven workflows, so that you can move data and transform data at scale, right? So and you can various services like be it Azure HD Insight, Hadoop, Databricks, SQL database, SAP HANA. There are native connectors available for all of them. High level quickly, we have, we talked about ADF as a service. There's definitely the UI and the SDK, and then underneath, for the compute, you have two options as we discussed. You have self-hosted IR, and Azure IR. Again, we'll go into detail when we can use what, but think of it, Azure IR is kind of Microsoft managed integration runtime. Self-hosted IR is something that you can host anywhere. It could be on-prem, it could be Azure, it could be inside your Azure VNet, or it could be in your some other cloud platform or somewhere else, right? So it gives you a lot of capabilities, with respect to writing your pipelines and running them depending on the source, right? If your source is on-prem, you would leverage the self-hosted IR in on-prem and things like that, right? So you have multiple options, right? So earlier in ADF v1 and ADF v2, you will keep hearing this. Now the current version of ADF is ADF v2, but earlier when ADF was released a couple of years back, there used to be something called as Data Management Gateway. Now IR is kind of a replacement of that, right, in v2. So I don't know how I'm doing on time. How much time we have?
You can continue. You can
Okay.
probably take another 5 minutes if you need. How much time do you need?
I think I'll take like 5 to 10 minutes max. Yeah.
That should be okay.
Yeah. So hybrid copy, right? So again, as we discussed, it's touchless. You probably this. A lot of this is no code. So you pretty much configure and run. And unless you need a custom pipeline, you really do not need to code any. It's all configuration. Self-hosted integration runtime is the component that gets installed on a virtual machine on-prem or a physical server on-prem. You can scale it. You can scale it up to 4 nodes per IR for self-hosted, and all of them are active, running round-robin fashion. So we faced a lot of problems when we started going to ADF. With self-hosted IR, we were not able to get required performance levels. From SAP HANA, when we were moving data, we were not. No matter what we do, our express route was 2 gig. From the on-prem side, on Azure side, 1 Gbps, and pretty much nothing else was running on it. But we could not get more than 5 Mbps, through the IR. We had to do a lot of tuning, and then we realized that there is a specific way in which we should use the dynamic partitions and stuff like that with SAP connector, and then we are now able to reach much we able to get much faster performance through the same IR setup that we have. So there is a lot of learning in how we configure and consume it. So in case you guys run into those scenarios, look at Microsoft documentation has the details, but again, you have to literally try out various things. We had to go to Azure ADF product group for that, and then we realized that these are the things that we should do it this way. And so in my next few slides, I'm going to talk about some of our learnings from that exercise. How ADF copy scales, right? So we learned a lot in that process. So I just thought I'll share with you all. Yeah. So first of all, how ADF copy scales, right? So we talked about various data sources, right? So we could have cloud data sources, we could have on-prem data sources, you could have your own Azure data sources as well, right? So you could, there could be a variety of sources you have. Now, ADF is scalable at different levels, right? So your ADF control flow can start with multiple copy activities in parallel. For example, you could use for each loops, right? So, and you can kind of nest your copy operations so that you can have parallelism built in. If you look at a single copy activity, you can take advantage of various scalable resources. For example, if you're using Azure IR in this case, you can specify up to 256 data integration units. They call it as DIUs for each copy activity, and it runs in a serverless manner, right? When you use Azure IR, so you only pay for the time when your pipelines are running and you're using that compute. Otherwise, you don't pay for it. So that's the most efficient way of using it. But again, if your data sources are on-prem, you may want to use a self-hosted IR instead, and then get better performance. When you use a self-hosted IR, you can take either, you can manually scale up your machine. So we started with a 4-core 8 GB machine on-prem IR, and we went up to 8-core 32 GB, and we found that even if we go up more than that, it's not giving us any benefits. So you need to figure out what is your scale and how far you really want to go or scale up. But there is only a certain level of scale up that will help you. Beyond that, you will just not use the capacity. At that point, you need to look at scale out. And as I said earlier, you could, for a single IR, you could use up to 4 nodes. So you can have multiple machines and you can scale out a single copy activity. So each single even if you're running a single copy activity, it will run across your nodes, and it will partition its files across the nodes. And we have seen linear performance improvement when we ran from one single IR to 4 nodes. Pretty much it was 4 times better. So that is something that you should always keep in mind, that scale out is going to give you the most optimum performance because you're running things in parallel. Likewise, if you're running a SFTP job and all that, so try to do, instead of running one single copy activity at one time, and for each file, you try to, kind of create a for each loop inside your pipeline so that you can process multiple files at once. So that you can do things in parallel. That will give you the most efficient output. Same thing goes with writes. So single copy activity can not just read, using multiple threads, but can also write using multiple threads. So if you're writing it to Azure Storage or ADLS storage, your write operations you will see tremendous performance boost if you use multiple, scale out strategies like this with the write operations as well. Any questions? We can talk about it, and we'll definitely share the slides and all that so you guys can go through it. Any questions we have?
I don't see any questions on the chat, Ashish.
Okay.
Thank you. It was a great presentation.
Thank you, everyone. I don't know whether we have time or if people are interested, I can walk you guys through quickly on the portal. I can show you what we have deployed, but again, up to you guys. Yeah, I know we have over time.
How much time do you think it will take?
I can just take a minute or two and show you guys. I don't want to run any pipeline because it's going to take a lot of time, but.
No, go ahead. If it's going to take a couple of minutes, go ahead.
Yeah, I can just show you guys this. Okay, give me a second. Let me pull. So again, I'm just going directly into the ADF. You can go to this guy from from inside your portal. When you click on your ADF, it will take you to a different experience of portal where you see this particular screen. Let's get started. And because we are using Git integration, a lot of features from here, we will see that this feature is disabled because you're in Git enabled mode. So I'm not going there because I want to visually show you guys things. But if you look at it, right, this is my dev environment. But if you look at it, we have multiple pipelines running here. For example, last 24 hours, we have about 118,000 runs. A lot of them failed because the teams are actively working on something. But this is dev. But then, as you see, right, there are you can actually, it gives you a tremendous amount of features. This was not as matured as it is right now. But then now you have abilities to go into each job and look at why it failed and how much time it took and things like that, right? So go into error messages and a lot of automation also you can do. We have done a lot of automation on getting these events and creating tickets and stuff like that. You can also look at each pipeline and each activity and go into details. For example, if I look at this guy, You can look at the Gantt view, and then you can see how much time it took for which particular step, when it ran, and stuff like that, right? So that will help you in troubleshooting as well. If the pipeline is taking more time than what you anticipate, you can look at each activity, and you can drill down pretty much, and look at all the details, right? For example, here, what particular integration runtime it was running on, like we have Azure hosted as well as self-hosted runtime, so which one is running on and stuff like that, right? So you can debug and look at various metrics and stuff like that. Yep. There's a lot of things to customize. As I said, it's a vast topic. We can keep talking about it for days, right? So yeah.
Good stuff, Ashish. Good stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish. Let me share my screen. Do you see my screen?
Yep.
All right, so this is going to be a very short session. It might not take more than 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes. I just wanted to run the group through the important updates in Azure that were announced in Ignite last week. I believe most of you know me. If not, my name is Vaibhav Gujral. I'm based out of Omaha, Nebraska, currently working for Kivit as a cloud architect. I'm a Microsoft Azure MVP and a Microsoft certified trainer. You can connect with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. Let's move on and talk about some of the exciting announcements that Microsoft made last week. I wanted to mention about Azure Orbital Service, which is essentially a fully managed ground station as a service, which is supposedly, it provides communication and control of your satellites. Customers can essentially communicate, downlink, and process data from their satellites without building their own ground stations. I have not really played around with the service, but looks very promising. Another service which I really liked is the Azure Communication Service, which lets customers to easily add real-time multimedia, voice and video features to your applications. It could support many scenarios like browser to browser or browser to app and so on. If you have used Datadog, which is a monitoring tool in the past, then now you can run Datadog as a service on Azure through the Azure Marketplace, which provides unifying experience to provision your Datadog environment. And another announcement Microsoft has made is around private Azure Marketplace, which I believe is very good for bigger enterprises, which the private Azure Marketplace does allow enterprises to govern which third-party solutions can be used by their users. And administrators can approve the third-party solutions upfront that comply with the enterprise compliance needs, and users can then later search and purchase those from the private marketplace. If you're not aware, Azure Advisor now supports a score to help improve your overall posture in Azure. It does offers certain set of recommendations around security and cost management. I believe adding this code does add a good weightage. Microsoft has also announced their first industry-specific cloud for healthcare, which includes services dedicatedly to support healthcare organizations. Azure VM solution has been out there in preview for some time, has been released now in GA. Microsoft has also announced the Unified Azure Certified Device Program. If you are an IoT developer, it might be a news for you. This program lets the device manufacturers to promote their IoT devices, and customers can actually go and find those devices through that certified device program. I was really excited to hear about some of the announcements they have made in the Azure App Services space, starting with the Premium V3 plan, the new premium tier that they have announced. It will certainly have certain benefits over the V2 plans, and moreover, it also comes with reserved instances support for app services, and this reserved instances support is coming for app services for the first time. If you're not aware of what RI is, what reserved instances are, it lets you book your or block your capacity upfront at discounted pricing. They have also pre-announced App Service Environments version 3, which I'm really excited about because looks like they have removed the stamp fees from ASE v3s, which will really make them competitive with the other app service plans. And moreover, I understand that there is a change in architecture as well. ASE's version 1 and 2 has been built on top of cloud services, whereas the new version is going to be built on top of virtual machine scale sets. Lastly, there is a new isolated plan as well, planned to be released in October. And another service I was really excited about was Azure Logic Apps. They have announced a bunch of announcements, starting with the Logic Apps will now run on a new containerized runtime similar to Azure Functions. There is a new Visual Studio extension now that allows you to develop and test your Logic Apps locally, which is a thumbs up from me personally. And now there is an integration with GitHub Actions. I didn't mention it here, but there's an integration with GitHub Actions now in place for Logic Apps, so that you can deploy your your Logic Apps from GitHub using GitHub Action workflows. Overall, go and check out that link where they have listed all the announcements around Logic Apps. It's amazing. Some updates in the infrastructure side of things. I noticed they have announced a new data center in Arizona, West US 3, and it does comes with availability zones. I'm not exactly sure if it was announced at Ignite or a few days before, but that new data center has been announced and is visible on the geographies page. Microsoft has been adding availability zones to their existing regions. At Ignite, they did announce support for availability zones in 2 more regions, Canada Central and Australia East. They've also announced a new service to make it easy to move resources between regions called as Azure Resource Mover. I think it's a great addition. In the past, it has been a problem to decide how to migrate resources between regions. Azure Virtual Machines now supports replication, failover, and failback from one availability zone to another within the same region. I think this feature has been long awaited, and check out that link for the detailed guidance. And not specifically at Ignite, but I guess a little earlier this month, they have also announced a new service called as Backup Center to provide a single unified experience for customers to manage their backups. Lots of good stuff announced around Azure Kubernetes services as well. To start with, the first feature they have announced is the stop-start cluster feature. Similar to any other workload, AKS workloads may also not need to run continuously, for example, during weekends or during non-business hours. This results in AKS resources just running idle and not doing anything. So in the past, one way could have been to reduce the number of nodes to 0 and just let the system pool running so that the system components are up and running. But now using the stop and start cluster feature, you can actually completely turn off your cluster, which essentially stops your control plane and nodes. And the overall state of your cluster is saved. And whenever you start your cluster back again, the state is restored. I believe this will result in huge cost savings for the customers who are using AKS. They've also announced support for Azure policies for AKS to apply the same level of safeguards and guardrails for your clusters running in your enterprise environment. Lastly, if you are a Azure Stack customer, for Azure Stack HCI, AKS support has also been announced. Azure Arc is a service which was announced in 2019 at Ignite for supporting hybrid scenarios. One of the features which was under preview called as Azure Arc enabled servers, which lets you manage your Windows and Linux machines hosted outside of Azure, is now in GA. Likewise, they have also announced 3 new services in public preview, starting with the Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes, which lets you attach and configure and manage your Kubernetes cluster inside Azure portal, similar to how you manage your other Azure resources. Similarly, you can also use Azure Arc-enabled SQL servers to register and manage your SQL Server instances running outside of Azure, including on-prem and edge devices. And there is another service in public preview called as Azure Arc-enabled Data Services, which you can utilize to manage SQL managed instances and Postgres instances running outside of Azure. Under Azure AI, they have announced some regular updates. Managed identities and private endpoints are now supported for Azure Cognitive Search. It is in GA. For Azure Cognitive Services, there are few preview features announced. The first one being the Metrics Advisor, which performs data monitoring and anomaly detection in time series data. And it also provides a set of APIs for data ingestion, anomaly detection, and diagnostics. It also does offers spatial analysis for computer vision API if you have been using it in the past. I think spatial analysis is a great addition to computer vision API, as it lets you analyze real-time streaming video from multiple camera devices. And lastly, for Azure Machine Learning, the designer and the automated ML features are now in GA. Speaking of Azure Data Services, for Azure Cache for Redis, there are two new pricing tiers being announced, Enterprise and Enterprise Flash. For Cosmos DB, they have announced a new serverless option, which I believe can result in huge cost savings. For MySQL and Postgres databases, there is a new deployment option called as Flexible Server that gives you much more control than the existing deployment options. Azure SQL Edge, which is targeted for IoT applications and solutions, is now generally available. For Azure Storage Blob, I was really looking forward to a feature which they have announced called as time tracking and access time-based lifecycle management, which once enabled adds a last access time property to each of your blobs. And whenever a blob is dead, that property is updated. I think this can come really handy. Also at Ignite, if you are a Databricks user in Azure, then they have also announced Delta Engine for Databricks, which is a high performance query engine to process data efficiently in your data lakes. I have not covered everything that was announced at Ignite. I just talked about the announcement that I come across. There is still so much I need to watch and find out what else has been announced. If you don't have time to watch videos, you can probably head out to the link listed there for the Ignite Book of News, where they have listed all the main announcements from Ignite across different products, including Azure, Microsoft 365, and Power Platform. If you have not checked, there is a Cloud Skills Challenge, which was announced at Ignite, under which if you will go through one of the tracks in Microsoft Learn, they will give you a free certification voucher, which can be used for any Azure certification. I have provided a link there. The challenge is still open and you can still register for it and avail your free certification voucher. And lastly, if you have time and availability to go and watch some of the content from Ignite on demand, I will suggest you to head out to their website. One cool feature that I have liked is for each of these sessions, they have made resources available. You can download PowerPoints, videos, and both. And they have also offered a PowerShell script. I'm not sure where I've seen that, but somewhere on Ignite page in one of the on-demand sessions I've seen, they have offered a PowerShell script, which lets you download most of the Ignite content through to your system locally. If you don't find it, just go and search out for some of the GitHub repos that MVPs have published, which you can also utilize to download all the content from Ignite website. With that, that's pretty much that I had for my presentation.